All right, we're back on the record. We had a minor battery problem. You were just telling me about life on the farm and loading the hay into the barn.
Well, the hay would get up to the track of the pulley, and then it would swing in to the second floor of the barn. And mainly, Uncle Phil would be back there kind of pulling a rope so it got to where it was going, and then he'd trip it. But then you had to back up. So we weren't very big. After the hay was down, then you'd have to back the Jeep up back to the hay wagon and start all over again. But it was fairly tricky. I guess that's how I learned to back up a Jeep and farm machinery.
Were there farmhands that were on the farm that you remember, or?
There were, and I recall at the time they were paid like $100 a month.
It wasn't a lot.
No.
And
they did live with Grandma, and Phil, a couple of them did. And then as Grandma got older, it was too much for
too
her
much to have them around.
to cook 3 meals a day, you know. And then we did have a hired man or so that when we bought the steel farm. But that was short-lived. That didn't last very long either.
What happened with that? It was a steel farm, a farm that was
That
next.
was a neighboring farm, and
80 acres.
and that the people that owned it, their last name was Steele.
Okay.
And so we just always called it the Steele Farm.
And so I didn't know that story, but what didn't work out about that?
I don't know the hired hands, whether we didn't have enough money or there wasn't enough work to keep them constantly busy.
Okay.
Because more and more stuff was automated. I can remember horses, having work horses.
Oh yes, we had work horses. There were 4 of them.
Well, and
When you say workhorses, what would they do?
Draft horses.
They'd
They-
pull the wagons, pull the manure loader, pull anything. The
Corn planter.
mower. But there was less physical work as things became more automated.
I
think.
barely remember the horses.
You don't remember the horses, so when you came along, there were tractors.
There were tractors.
What about school? Did you all go to the one-room schoolhouse?
Yep.
Yeah.
What was Barb? Tell me about your memory about the one-room schoolhouse. What that was
Well,
like.
the big event of the year was the Christmas program. They were happy years. I liked it. Ruth Ann can address really the quality of education more than I can. But they were good years. The neighbors.
How many kids were in school? Like, more or less.
28.
That's what I'd say.
Never
too.
more than 32 or 34.
Right.
But all
Grades
through all
1,
grades,
First through 8.
first through 8. And did y'all go home for lunch?
No.
We brought our lunch.
You brought
little
your lunch?
lunchbox. I had a black. I was thinking about that when you wanted to do it. I wished I'd kept it. It was a man's black lunchbox.
Like a construction type
Yes.
lunchbox?
Construction, and now it would be worth a mint. But it didn't. It wasn't one of these that with the logos of or Disney or
Right.
whatever. It was a black lunchbox.
Metal.
And it lasted me all 8 years.
Did it really?
Yep.
One thing I'd like to go back and tell about the farm was that Uncle Phil mainly worked with the breeding
Of the steers?
of
Or the steers?
of the bulls and the
Yeah,
cows.
because steers don't breed, do they? It's been a long time since I've been on the farm.
Father worked with after the calves were born. They would nurse on the mothers twice a day. And he was very good with machines. And did a lot of the field work, repairs. And I could remember following him around. I was always curious about the machinery and helping with him with that. Where I remember Kathryn, she would carry a bushel basket on her shoulder and would
Feed
feed
cattle.
would feed cattle.
And we had chores. I can remember feeding the cattle. I can remember picking up eggs, which I think I told you before. I was never fond of the chickens.
Oh, and I loved the chickens.
Yes,
I hated
and Kathryn
chickens.
was very good outside. She did a lot of work outside. I remember Barb helping more in the house.
When I was young.
Yeah,
I
right.
don't know that I helped with anything.
The youngest always
It-
kind of gets a pass. Not always, but sometimes gets a
Gets a
pass.
pass.
You know,
Oh, definitely.
right, but getting back now to the rural school, we did, I felt, had a decent teacher. Mrs. Roberts,
For 8 years?
I had her for 8 years.
I had her for 6 years.
And back then, the teaching was just with a textbook and a workbook. You know, every subject had a textbook and a workbook. So it wasn't like education today, but she was thorough and we learned to read.
So somebody didn't learn to read, though. Was that you?
I didn't because I had a different teacher in first and second grade.
And you were
I was
memorizing.
memorizing things, and my parents didn't realize till the end of first grade that I wasn't reading. That I would read these books, but I wasn't looking at the pages. I had memorized stuff. And I think it was too late. I think they'd already signed the contract with that teacher for my second grade year. But then I think they made sure that there was another teacher when I went into third grade. And she was organized, I think, stern, I would say,
But not mean.
no, not me, but you had to be, and you had to have a schedule, because you'd have 8 different classes going.
Was there a time where you would go to school less because of the work on the farm? Like you hear about some kids, they would, or was it just a regular?
We always went to school.
Right, and most of the days you're talking about, I think, were earlier, because I don't remember kids missing school because of farm work.
Okay. And then did you go home when you were older and work on the farm, or?
We always had chores to do, and we'd walk to school and walk home.
And what did you do in the summers? Do you remember?
Work. We'd play, but like Ruth Ann said, she was driving Jeep. I think we probably all were driving that Jeep by 8 years old.
I think I
Right.
have a memory of that old Jeep. Was it an old military looking
Yeah.
Jeep?
Yes,
Mhm.
I'm sure it was surplus World War II, although,
What are you laughing about?
In the summer, I can remember laying on the lawn and looking up at the clouds. So I don't know how busy I was.
And then we had to mow lawn.
Oh, yes, we mowed lawn.
we had a huge lawn, and Dad,
Grandma's
Was it a driving mower or
No.
a push?
Amazing.
Oh,
Push.
was it at least a gas mower, or was it the old-fashioned guy?
originally it was a push mower. They probably didn't mow as much, but as we were growing up, they trimmed the house lawn. Can you remember the barns? They
Mhm.
always trimmed around the barns. Grandma Great planted flowers. We had
Our lawn,
lilacs and lots of flowering shrubs.
yeah. And it always looked nice. Our lawn, from the the feed yards, or to the fence on the west over to the east barn, it was always mowed, and if you drove by, it always looked nice. Now, there probably were a lot of weeds in that lawn, but we just kept mowing them down, and it was green.
What's the story behind the maples?
That is another thing when you were talking is, I think that we all grew up, that we had a strong tradition behind us. Our grandpa Hugh took over the farm from his father, J.C., and there was always, to me, a long tradition. J.C. did very well with the Hereford cattle. And when my husband went to short course, they talked in the short course class about the bull domino.
What's
So,
the bull domino?
It was a well-known bull. Kathryn could
Breeding,
You all had a bull named Domino,
yeah.
and he was well known.
That they had bought where? I forget.
no idea.
In the West, Colorado or Wyoming?
I don't remember. I better not say, because I'm not sure.
Okay. But
So you're saying that when Bob went to a short course
At
on
the UW
agriculture,
of Wisconsin,
okay,
they talked about the bull domino and the effect on breeding of Hereford cattle.
really?
Yes.
And that was
Us.
Hugh.
Or
And-
JC.
That was probably back to JC's time.
Okay. In terms of bringing the Herefords to maybe the Midwest or the area anyway. And
Right, and having a good cattle herd.
Right.
And the breeding and the genetics, I think, are always tricky.
Right.
Um,
And they
but-
showed at State Fair and the area futurity and the shows. So we always had a tradition of showing Herefords.
and they'd go to Kansas City,
Kansas City, the
Royal.
Royal.
and you would show, but then there was always a sale. So of course, the end game was to sell the bulls and the heifers at a good price.
And there was an article in the Hereford Journal, and Uncle Phil and a bull were on the cover, and the bull had won first place in his class.
I think I've seen that.
And we all have a copy of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was something to be on the cover of the Hereford Journal.
It was
That was,
something.
I don't know, 1950?
52.
Yeah, anyway. or-
And the other thing I remember was Dad was good with photography. And I have a picture of my Grandpa Hugh and Grandma Mabel sitting in the front of a lighted fireplace in the big house. And he had a copy of the Hereford Journal in his hand.
that Dad took.
That Dad took that picture.
And so when I reference the Maples, that's the name of the farm.
Which I think JC named.
And did-
Because there was a maple grove where the houses were.
So-
No,
No?
those trees, most of
The
those.
ones that run up and down the road?
Well,
And in
those
front of the houses.
Those in front of the houses, when the big house was built about early 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
Great-grandma Robinson, Mary, planted a lot of trees, and they told about how she hand-watered those trees to get them to live.
Are they still there?
A lot of them are gone.
A lot of them are gone just from weather and
Old age.
old age.
And then there are younger maple trees, and I think Dad might have planted those when he was younger.
Along the road.
Oh, right. And there were a couple in the front,
Yeah, but I remember
right.
that
along-
he planted them along the
But
road.
I think those maples, that's how it came to be, was that Mary had planted those soft maple trees.
And Dad was busy with hobbies like photography. Mother was active in church work, was active at St. John's. Dad was, I think, first a town supervisor, which was, we lived in Union Township and they had somebody who was in charge of the township. It was volunteer and it was voted, but you took care of the roads, and if you had any problems,
Taxes,
yeah, they ran the schools, I think.
right.
I think they had their own school district. And then he was elected to the County Board of Supervisors, which was different than in Texas, because I think in Texas they have 4 precincts, but it was a much larger group in Rock County, or in Wisconsin. But he enjoyed the politics.
Did you all ever get in trouble?
I was always in trouble.
Well, tell me something that you did. I mean, the
I
statute.
don't know that, I can't, I'm not gonna tell anything specific, but it just seems like I was always doing something.
Well, I always thought you were so funny.
Right.
We used to just laugh at some of the
And
things.
she
you
would get in trouble, but then Barb would make some funny remark, and Mother or Dad couldn't stay mad because she had such a good sense of humor. And I remember, you remember this too, Kathryn was very good, impossibly good, better than I was.
The poor middle child, really.
But she would always mind and do what was right, and I was a little bit of a handful when I was young, I think. I wasn't exactly defiant, but I can remember I wanted my own way, and it was hard to direct me sometimes.
Did y'all in the summertime do go on any vacations any place? Where would you go? And
We were very fortunate. We really, for the 50s, through the 50s, we really did a lot of traveling.
And we
Yeah.
always had a summer vacation.
Well, but a couple of winters during winter break, at Christmas, we went to Florida.
Biloxi.
One year we went to Biloxi.
just to see the ocean, or
Yeah, just for
And New Orleans.
When we were a little older, we went to South Dakota, and we went to Washington, D.C., New York City, and then went up into New York and saw the Emery family. And J.C.'s wife, Mary, was an Emery. And I think they lost the farm during the Depression, and they went back east to the state of New York. But they always kept up the association, and some of the Emerys numerous times came to Wisconsin, and we went there once.
And we were always busy, we really haven't mentioned that, in the spring and summer with 4-H. You asked what we did, and we spent a lot of time
Did you all-
raising steers and showing, getting the heifers ready to show.
I sewed. They were in foods within. Well,
I
they
did
both,
sew.
They both sewed. Had sewing in 4-H.
And really, we did not have a lot. I mean, there weren't the sports for girls at that time. So we were, we had church and we had 4-H, and that was about it.
Right.
in school, church?
And school,
School.
but we didn't have,
And I think all of us would say how much fun. I really wasn't all that good about showing cattle. Really, I don't know that I enjoyed it till I got in high school. Ruth Ann and Kathryn were very good with the cattle. They were very good showmen. Ruth Ann had grand champion steer at Rock County, and Kathryn had reserve grand champion at Rock County, and they were very good showmen. Did you go to State Fair too?
Yes.
And we went to State Fair and Junior Livestock Show in Madison, and in the 50s that was a big deal.
Was that the state fair in Madison?
In
or?
Madison, it was the Southern Wisconsin Junior Livestock Show. It was huge. They showed pigs, sheep, cattle.
that's it.
That was probably it, but it was major. And between State Fair and Junior Livestock Show, we met a lot of other kids that we still have kept in contact with. And I think that was probably one of the highlights of being young, was doing that. Ding and I went to fraternity
What's that?
several times. That was like in March,
Another cattle show
Okay.
another cattle show.
for Wisconsin.
Uncle Phil let us go along, and it was thoroughly enjoyable.
Right, we had a lot,
We had-
and you would go to the state fair and stay in the dorms. So when you were 11 and 12, that was a big deal. And when you were in Madison at the livestock show, they had dormitories that you would stay in and a cafeteria to eat in. We
We
thought
did-
it was really fun.
And we got our picture in the Wisconsin State Journal.
Yeah,
Yep.
several times.
Yep.
But we did, I mean, just the times were different back then. Because kids didn't have
As much stuff.
as many things that.
Choices, as many choices.
As we do today. And probably not as much money.
Right, and we were lucky to do the things we did, because I think our parents both, we weren't poor, but they didn't have a lot of money. But we were able to do the steers. All that stuff was expensive, which I never realized at the time, but you'd have the extra feed, you'd have the trucking fees, you'd have to get a truck to
That's-
take them to the fair. you'd have all the equipment, the bridles and the show boxes and all the stuff. It was expensive.
But we used equipment that had come from JC.
Well, that's true too.
I
We
mean,
did,
you
yeah,
know, some of that carried down.
right, that's true. And we made money on the steers, or they let us keep the money that we made when we sold the steers, and that was a college
It's kind of
fund.
like your job, basically. So
Right.
instead of going working in town, you worked on the farm and
Well,
raised your animals.
I went to work, I got a job when I was 14. Did you girls work at the Leader?
Well, we worked at the Leader.
Which was just a weekly job, but you were assembling basically an advertiser. And it was just once a week.
The leader was an
An advertiser. They
Okay.
still have it, and they had some kind of a hand press that would put the pages out, but then you'd have to assemble the pages. And I can remember I was 14, and you were not supposed to work until you were 16. And there was an elderly woman in Evansville who was always nosing around, Elizabeth Baker, because she thought that the kids who were working there were too young.
Did you
And
all,
then what did you do when you were in high school?
Then I was a car hop at the A&W, which was not it was, you know,
That was a hard job.
But it was supposed to, it was a good job.
right, it was a good job and you could make decent money.
Neat people running it.
Yes. A
it was
friend
there
of-
for a long time too, wasn't it?
Yes.
Even
it
when I was
there.
a kid, I remember there being an A&W there.
there, right.
So I want to ask, do you remember the end of World War II at all? Do you remember World War II at all?
Yeah, I remember Mother, and I think I said this before, but I can
Okay.
remember Mother and Dad following World War II in the newspaper. And there were units from Evansville, I think all over, but mainly in the Pacific. And they would pour over the newspaper and the pictures. Guadalcanal and New Guinea and I don't know, specifically, but they always followed that. And they had, you knew Bill Schuster,
Mhm.
who was a good friend of both Mother and Dad's, who was a Japanese prisoner of war in World War II. And that greatly affected them.
Right, and
And
Herb
Durner.
Durner went on the Bataan Death March.
And lived.
And lived. And I can remember Mother and Dad didn't know that Pearl Harbor was bombed that Sunday until they went to town Sunday night.
See, I don't remember that. I heard
Mother
them saying
told
that.
that story that they did not know about
It's
it.
based on the communications and
Right.
things were different then.
Yeah,
And so we're I guess at the end of World War II and shortly thereafter, were times good or were times tough or? Because you heard during World War II there being rationing and shortages, but after World War II it was kind of a boom time,
Mother and Dad said we did okay, because one, we had the farm.
right?
And because Mother and Dad had 3 little girls, there were the ration books. And so there was a little more food because of
Oops,
us.
sorry.